boy, you are in for a long ride. This ChatGPT we are going to build can sing.
Oh, oh, oh. Da, 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 da. Oh, oh, oh. Da, da, da.
It can generate images. Give you that funny video you have always been cracking up to. This ChatGPT has features you won't even imagine. It has 2 brains like Brainiac. This tutorial is worth your time, I guarantee that. You do not want to miss when I deleted my database and so much more. After this video, your imagination will be the limit to creating a superb ChatGPT of your own. I am going to take you from start to finish, and we will not be stopping there. I will show you ways to monetize your own version of ChatGPT you build, so you can once and for all make that money too. We will be building the front end with Flutter. I also recommend you stick with me and watch to the end of the video, because what I say at the end is a potential life-changing words for everyone, even if you are not a programmer. Let's us ask our GPT for advice before we start. Give me the best advice for 2024. Well, what are you waiting for? Subscribe. You should also check the description and pinned comments below, as I have some information that will definitely help you in this video. Alright, enough talk. Let me show you how to build some ChatGPT. So let's start building some ChatGPT, shall we? Now, as you can see, some of the files are already here. In some of my videos, you already see that we use a clean architecture format, and we do so here as well. In this video, I've already set up the authentication part of the project. Now I have left out the authentication part of this project simply because we will not be really needing it, and also I do not want this video to be that long. But anyway, if you want to start at exactly where I am, all you need to do is come to my GitHub repository here. The link will be in the description below, and in here where you see the master, just choose the auth. All you have to do now is click this auth, and there you go. This is the exact code that you see right here. And so all you have to do is come here, press on code, and then either download, zip, or copy this and go to the terminal and then use git clone. And then you'll be able to be at exactly where I am. And so I hope you've done that. If you've done that, you'll be exactly where I am. And so let's start building our ChatGPT. And so let me refresh everything here. Wonderful. So if you've been able to clone the repository and run the code, and when you choose Chrome Web JavaScript here and run the code, you would get this nice looking screen here. And so let's go ahead and sign up. So in here, we sign up. And there we go. So let's input email. We're going to use popcorn@gmail.com. And the password would just be popcorn. How original. And let's go and press sign up. There we go. We get this loading indicators and we get a splash screen. How can I help you today? Let's get started. Superb. And so we are going to create our GPT. And now let's look at the first thing we have to create. We'll start with designing the front end as it is on the screen now. And then we'll go on to design the back end, and then we'll just link everything up, and then we'll get ourselves a very nice functional ChatGPT. And so now, let's go ahead and come back to our editor. Let's create a feature. So the feature is going to be our chat functionality, and in there we have our repository. Inside the chat, we are going to have the controller. Inside the chat again, I'm going to have screens. And then we, of course, be needing the widgets as well. So now inside the screen, we are going to create our chat screen. We'll be using Flutter Riverpod as our state management tool. And so in here, we have import material.dart. And then we'll be using the stateful consumer that is provided to us by Flutter Riverpod. And we'll just call this chat screen. We'll have to import Flutter Riverpod. And there we go. Of course, this would be a scaffold. And not to get confused, this is what we are trying to build here. This is a lovely interface where we have 2 sections here. And so let's go ahead and quickly create that. And so the first thing we'll have is a scaffold, of course. And then the body would be a column. Inside the column, we would have children. And then what we'll have next is an expanded widget. And then in there, we would have our row, which takes children. And then what we'll have in the row will be some widgets we'll create. And so when you take a look at this, we have 2 different sections here, so we'll call this section the previous chat, because that is where it displays our previous searches. And then we'll call this section the main chat. And so these are 2 separate widgets we're going to create. So the first one is going to be called the previous chat, and then the second one is going to be called the main chat screen. Let's just call it main chat. And so now we'll come to our widgets, and in our widgets, we'll start with the previous chat.dart. So as always, we are going to import material.dart, and we'll create a stateful consumer, which we get from Flutter Riverpod, and then we'll call this previous chat. Of course, we will need to import Flutter Riverpod, and there we go. And what will we have? It will be a container, of course. We'll return a container, and we'll have our width to be 280. These values are already tried and tested. And then we'll have our height to be 642. I know, a weird value. And then we'll have our decoration, which would be box decoration, where we would have the color to be colors.black. And then the child of this container would be a column, where we would have the children, which would be equal to another container, which would have a height of 100. The child would be a row, which would again be a container. And then it would have a width of 200 and then a height of 14. Okay, looking great. I think we should also add a padding, which would be edge_inset.symmetric. If you've watched my previous videos, you know I like using symmetric a lot. Vertical would be 5, and then horizontal would be 10. I want to see what we've done so far. I'll come back to the chat screen and then try and import this. But since this is not ready, we'll just comment it out. Let's see what we have. And in here, we see this text. Let's get started here. Now, this is just some dummy code that I wrote, because we hadn't yet created our chat screen. And so when you come to Splash, when you come to the decoy screen, this is what we are seeing here. Okay, so now we want to replace this because this was just a dummy code. Because again, we hadn't created our chat screen yet. And so we'll come back to our Splash screen. And then we'll also go to our router. Now, if you've cloned the repository I told you earlier, you would be able to see all these in the code. All right. And so in here, we need to make sure that our chat screen is in our roots. And so inside our chat screen, we'll come here and say static const root name, and then we'll go with chat screen. And come back to our router. Let's just copy one of these instances. Let's place them here. But this time, we're going to have chat screen, and we'll be navigating to chat screen. Now that our chat screen is registered, let's come back to our Splash screen here, and then change this decoy screen to chat screen.routename. Wonderful. And so after a hot refresh, let's see what we've got. And there we go, guys. It's almost looking the same. Now we have this nice looking chat screen here because when you come to our spectrum.dart, we've specified the scaffold background color to have almost the identical background color as ChatGPT. And so it is looking very good. Let's go ahead and continue to design it. And so we gave it a value of 10. And a little decoration wouldn't hurt. And so let's say another box decoration. In there, let's give it a border radius. And say border radius.circular. And say 15. We would also give it a border and say border.all. And we'll say color would be spectrum.white color. Let's import that. And there we go. Spectrum.white color. All right. And then I think we'll also give it a width of 1. Wonderful. It's looking superb. Now, what would be the child of this container? The child would be a row because we are trying to make this here. This new chat and this, that's why we are putting it in a row. Let's get back into it. So in there we have a row, and in there we would have children. In the children, we would have an icon. So we would have an icon, which will be icons.add. Looking great. And then let's give the color spectrum.white color again. And then a little size box. And let's give it a width of 10 because we are in a row here and I want space between the icon and the chat. And so we'll then have a text and then we'll say new chat. And then let's give it a little style and say style where we have text style to be color and we'll have it as spectrum.white color again. All right. And let's see what we got after reloading. And there we go. This is looking very great. I'm impressed with it. So now the next thing we'll have is this one right here. So let's create that as well. And so after the new chat, we would come out of this row, out of the container as well. And then the next thing that we would want to do, let me add trailing commas so I can see where I'm clearly. So let's just const here so that all the blue squeaky lines are gone. There we go. And so, after the container, we have another container where in there we would have a width of 15, and we would have padding, which would be edgeInsets.symmetric, where the vertical would be 5, and then the horizontal would be 10. We would have decoration, which would be a box decoration, and then we'll have a border radius of borderRadius.circular, which would be 15. We would have the shape to be box shape.rectangle, and then we also have the border to be border.all. Then we have our color to be spectrum.whitecolor. And then we'd also have the width of 1 as well again, and the child of this container would just be an icon button, where we have the onPressed, which would be anonymous, and let's just have a const icon, which would be icons.segment. Now, let's see what we got. Okay, so now we have this nice looking shape here, but I think I want some space in between. And so, just here, we'll have a const-sized box, and we'll give it a width of 10. That would be great. And I also want to specify the color here as spectrum.whitecolor, and we'll go with white color here. Wonderful, this is looking very great. We would then be displaying our previous chat like we have here. We'll write the logic for that later, but I think for now we'll do this, and I'll just go and design the main screen as well. And so now, inside our widgets, we then have our main chat dot. We would import material.dart, of course, and then still have a stateful consumer, which is given to us by Flutter Riverpod, call it main chat. And as always, we're going to be importing Flutter Riverpod. Inside the main chat, we would have a scaffold, and this scaffold will be wrapped with an expanded widget, which takes any available space. Because right now, I want it to take any available space that it can get, after the previous chat has taken the space it needs. I want it to take any available space. I would give it a background color of spectrum dot, and we'll go with my black chat GPT color. And then we would have a body, and we would have a column followed by children. And the first thing we would have is a sized box. We'll give the height of media query, dot of context dot size dot height. And then we just want to take 100 out of the total height of the screen. The child, as you could see now, let me get the image. The child is this right here. And then it's a column where we ask the question and where we display the answer. Okay? And so this is also going to be a widget that we create. In here, I would just call it Showcase. Let's go ahead and create this Showcase widget. So we come to widget and say showcase.dart. Again, we will import material.dart and then create a stateful consumer widget, which we get from Flutter Riverpod. I know I'm sounding like a broken record now, and call it Showcase. Import Flutter Riverpod. Alright, and so for now, we're going to return a listview.builder. There's going to be a lot of logic that we're going to implement here, but for now, let's just try and design the UI. We'll later focus on the logic part when we've got our backend connected to our front end. For now, we'll just return a column, and then we'll have a children where we would have our first container, which would be our question container. As you can see right here, this is what we are trying to create. When we are done, we'll try and create this answer container as well. Let's go ahead and create the question container. The question container would have a width of double.infinity. It would have a height of 100, and then we'll give it a padding, where we say edgeInset.symmetric. Yeah, I'm addicted to using symmetric. And then we'll have vertical to be 10, and then we'll have the horizontal to be 100. Again, all these values are pre-tested. And then the next one we will have will be a decoration, of course, so we could specify the color and whatnot. And so inside the box decoration, I'm going to have the color, which would again be spectrum dot, and this would be my black chat GPT color. Then we'd have a child, which would be out here, and we'd have a child, which would be a row, and in there we would have children. What would these children contain? So these children would contain, we first have a circle avatar, so that we could display an AI image, and that would be a background image, which would be an asset image. Again, if you cloned the repository I showed you, you would have all this, which will be pic.png, which we get from our assets folder right here. Wonderful, I think we've designed it well. The next thing that I would then have is a const-sized box, and we'll give it a width of 20. But I think we need to be out of the circle avatar. Let me get rid of these blue lines by adding const everywhere. There we go. Now after the width, we then have our text. That's the question we asked. For now, we just hard code. But when we get to implementing our logic, they will be dynamic values. For now, let's just say, who is Ariana Grande? There you go. Yeah, you guessed it. I'm a very big fan of Ariana. Okay? And so that is it for our container. That's our question container. Let's go ahead and also create our answer container right here. It's going to be exactly like this, but it will have different color, and we set different parameters around it. And so let's get out of the row, out of the container. And then let's also create the answer container. And so we'll have a container. We'll also have width to be $infinity. As I said, it will be mostly exactly like the question container, where we have symmetric, you guessed it, we'll be using it, and then we'll also have it to be 10, and then the horizontal to be 100. We'll also set some constraints, where we would have our box constraints, so that we won't be getting any render flow errors, and so we'll set the max width to $infinity. And then we'll set the max height to 350 for now. If we need to change it, we will. Okay, this is looking very great. And of course, we'll have our decoration, which will be box decoration. And then what we'll have in this box decoration, we'll just have our color. And then this color will be spectrum.answerGPT, so that we have this color right here. Okay, and the next thing that I'm going to have is the child. It needs to be in the container, so we'll say child. And then it would be a row exactly like the question container. And so we have the row, then children. And then it will also be circle avatar. And in there, we'll have our background image. Let's also use the asset image like so. So we have asset image. And then we have pic.png. Now, after having the background image, we'll then say const, and we have a sized box, which would be a width of 20 as well. And then what we are going to have is a typewriter. Now again, if you've cloned the repository, I told you earlier, you would have this typewriter widget. And what this typewriter widget does is, it's an animation widget that displays the answer in a form of typewriting, as you see on your screen now. This is a logic I implemented to get that animation. Very nice animation. And so we come back. Again, for now we just have static values. And so we'll say she is the best singer in the world. Great. And then we'll have a text style. For now we'll just leave the text style as it is, and then we'll const everywhere else, so that we get rid of these blue squeaky lines and your visibility on the screen is improved. There we go. Now I think we could import this showcase now. Now let's see what we got. Let me just get rid of these screenshots here, okay? It's not showing. Let's see the reason why it is not. Let's go back to our chat screen. We commented it earlier, so let's bring it back, and you will need to import it as well. There we go, and I think this time it will show up. And there you go, guys. We've been able to create it. Who is Ariana Grande? And she's the best in the world. And the reason why we are having multiple values here is because in our listview.builder, that is inside the showcase, in the listview.builder, we didn't specify an item count. But now let's just say 3, so that we don't get dizzy with these multiple values. And so, there we go. We have 1, 2, and we have 3. Who's Ariana Grande? We get she is the best singer in the world. So we've been able to design this, but what is left is the place we input our text to ask a question or search an answer. Okay, so let's place a text form field right here. So we'll go to the main chat. And to display, I would need to wrap this sized box, wrap it in a column, and then change it to a stack. It's much more convenient. And the reason for doing this is because we want the text form field to be on top of the showcase. Outside of the stack here, we would have a sized box. And we'll give it a height of, say, 20. And we need to be outside of the stack. There we go. We would then have our text form field. So let's quickly create our text form field. Text form field has this infinite width, and so we would need to wrap this with a sized box and then specify the width so that we don't get any render flow errors. So let's say the width to be 300. Then the text form field will of course have a controller which we call question controller, because it is what will control our questions, the questions we ask, and then we'll have a decoration which takes in an input decoration. This is us designing the text form field. The input decoration would have filled to be true. We also set the filled color, which would be spectrum. Then we'll go with the my black chat GPT color. Okay, so after specifying the fill color, we could then set the enabled border and the focused border, which will take the outline input border, where we will have our border radius to be border radius.circular. It will be 15. We will also have our hint text, which will be ask me anything, I will do it. There you go, and we also need a suffix icon, which will be an icon button. But now the onPressed will be an anonymous function, and we have our icon, which will be icons.send. Also, we will design the hint style, and so we'll have hint style to be text style. And I just want to design the color. Of course, we'll make it color.gray and then give it 900. Okay, this is looking great, and we need our focused border. So we come here, and then let's just copy this outline border and paste it. Okay, I think we are almost good to go. Let's just create our text editing controller. So in here we have final text editing controller, where we have our question controller, which will be equal to the text editing controller right here. You would need to call the dispose method so that we avoid memory leaks. And so in here, we'll say question controller.dispose. Perfect. All right, now let's see what we've got. Okay, so we've got this nice looking text form field where we could ask questions, but I think I want it much wider. It's much more wider here. So let's make it that way. So all we'll have to do is increase our width, and let's just say 600. And I think that would be it. And let's see. Okay, there we go, guys. This is looking very good. So this is where we'll be able to, ask our question. And then when we press this button, we get an answer. Superb. So we've been able to build our front end. Now we need to build our back end so that we connect it to the front end. So we have a functional ChatGPT. And for the back end, we are going to be using Node.js. And as I said in the introduction, this ChatGPT has two brains. One of them is MongoDB, and the other one is Firestore database. It's going to be fun. So you could build an entire project again to create the backend, but I am fine with creating a folder server here and writing my backend code. And the first thing we will have is index.js. So let's start the process of connecting our front end to our backend. And to do so, we are going to be creating an API. And we'll be using Node.js for that, where we connect our API to our MongoDB, and we'll be able to fetch the data that the user asks for. And so in here, we are going to be needing certain things. Let's come to our terminal, and then let's just install certain things. So let's go to the terminal, and in there, we are going to need Express. And with npm iExpress, I will be able to install Express in my application. So let's get the server started. We would have our const Express, where we would require Express. This is just like saying import package flutter material.dart. This is the syntax in JavaScript. So the next thing we're going to have is our port, which is going to be 3000. How original? And then we're also going to be needing our HTTP. So then we just require that here. So you have const HTTP that would require HTTP. Let's get our server started. And so to do so, I'm going to say const app is equal to express. With that, we get the app.use, specify the root, we get back a request, response, and a next. And in there, what we basically want to do. All right, then I'm going to say res.status.json. And in the JSON, we'll have a message property, and we'll say server cooked and baked. There you go. Now let's start our server. All you have to do is a const server is equal to http.createServer. And we have the app. And we say server.listen to the port. And that is how simple it is to use Node.js to create a server. With this, we will be able to create a server. Let's run the command to test it, and then we'll be able to have our server running. Okay, so let's run our server with the command nodeindex.js. Okay, we don't get any errors, so let's go to our browser. And then in here, we say localhost 3000. And there we go. We see our server started, where we get a message, server cooked and baked, which means that now our server is running live, which means that every code we wrote here is looking great. So now let's go ahead and quickly set up our server, create the server, and able to connect it to our database. Before we do, there are certain packages we would need, and so let's quickly install them. So the next thing we need is the nodaemon. So we say npm install nodaemon. We would also need the body parser. And I think that would be it. We would continue to install the packages as and when we need them. And so we need the nodaemon, and we also need the body parser as well. Great. And so we say npm install body parser. There we go. And as the body parser is installing, there was one thing that I forgot. When we started our server, we just started. You see, in our package.json right now, we have almost an empty folder here. In order to get all the things that we needed, we should have said npm init, so that we get everything we need to start our server and get a better package.json file than we did here, okay? And so, that was my bad. And that was a little oversight by me. Please forgive me. Let me bring this here so that your visibility is great. And so we see our package name, our version, and we just say ChatGPT backend. Again, sorry for not remembering to initialize our server, okay? So in your keywords, we just say creed, author, creed, license. Yep. And then we are asked, is this okay? We say, yes, it is. And when we come back to our package.json, then we get a better file system than we did before. And I think if you are coming from a JavaScript background, it should be easier. But if you are not, I'll walk you through it. Now, to start our server, we don't want to continuously be typing node-index.js. So, what we want to do is inside the package.json, we would have a start in scripts, where in there we would say nodeemonindex.js. Now, every time we just say npm start, this script runs, okay? And then after it runs, this nodemon would track any changes that comes in the code. And then we wouldn't have to continue typing in the node-index.js. Wonderful. So now that we've done that, let's go ahead and then let's create our first model. So inside the servers, we would say models. And then the first model we'll create is a search model. Awesome. So I'm going to describe how a search would look like. So we say search model.js. So in order to create our model, we will need to also install one other package, and that would be Mongoose. And so we say npm install Mongoose, which will install Mongoose for us, so that we'll be able to interact with the Mongoose database as well. Okay, so Mongoose has successfully been installed, so let's go back to our search model, and we'll require Mongoose, of course. And so we say Mongoose, it will be equal to require, in here we would have our Mongoose. Perfect. And the next thing we'll have is our schema, which I would call search schema. Basically how our search is going to be like. So there's a few things that we're going to be needing, and there are a couple of things on how our search should look like. The first thing is we'll say mongoose.schema. And in it, let's describe how, if someone is searching for something, it would look like. Of course, the first thing we would have is an ID, and would use mongoose.schema.types.objectID. And the next thing a search would have would be, of course, a response. So that means whatever the person searches for, the result, so we would call it response. And this would have a few tweaks. The type would be of string, and then we'll set required also to true. And the next thing will be the search parameter. Okay, so basically the question the person asked. So when we come here, this would be the thing the person will ask. So, for example, who is Ariana Grande would be our search parameter. So whatever the person types here, we would compare it to this variable we are about to create, this schema we are about to create, and it would help us track the necessary response for it. And that would be a list of string. And also, we want to know the message type. What this means is we want to know the type of response that is coming to us. So if, for example, I searched for who's Ariana Grande, then of course I want a text, but what if the person searches for images of Ariana Grande? Then we also need to display our images. That's what you saw in the intro as well. And so we would need to know what type of message it is. And so in here, the type would be string. And then we have an enum of what type it could be. Okay, these are all JavaScript syntax. And I think I'll be iterating this more. If you do not understand any of the syntax I'm coding, please hit me up in the comment section. I'll be very glad to help you. And so we could have a string, we could have an image, we could have an audio, and we also could have a video. Okay, this is perfect. And then the last thing we would also have is a date. So when the particular search was entered into our database, and so the type would be a date, and then the default will be set to date.now, so that we don't have to manually input it. So whenever this response was created, it's what you give to the user. And of course, we should not forget to model.export is equal to mongoose.model. And then the name we want to call it, which would be search. And then we also add search schema. Looking very, very good. So this is our simple search schema that we are going to be storing in our database. We're going to have an ID, a response, a search parameter, message type, and a date. Now let's go ahead and create the routes. We have a post route and a get route. So, as the organization behind our GPT, we need to have a way to set and update our database. So that would be our post request. And then we need to be able to give access to users to be able to get any data they want from our database. And that would be our get request. And so let's quickly create a new folder. Let's call it root. And then we'll have our search.js route right here. So this is us now creating the route for our post request and the get request so that we could set information to our database and also get information when users contact our database. And so we need Express, of course. Again, if you're not familiar with JavaScript and Node.js and confused with the syntax I'm coding, I'm here to help. Please just hit me up in the comment section. It will be a pleasure to help you. And so we also need our router, which would be an instance of the Express. We have express.router as a function. And there we go. We also need our model, so we will get that. So we will say require. We will say ... where we get our models, and then we get our search model. Great. And we also need to connect our code to MongoDB. And we will be using the mongoose.connect. So we will get a link from MongoDB when we set up our database in MongoDB, and then we will be able to connect our code to the database. So for now, let's create a post request and a get request. Let's start with the post request. We will say router.post, which will just be /search, like so. Awesome. So this is how it will be /search. So this will be / here, and then we'll have a request, response, and next. So what do we want? We first want to store our data to the database, so we say new search. We need to populate our search variable. And so to populate our search, we know that our search has an ID, which we get from mongoose.types.objectID. And then we also get our response, which we get from request.body.response. And also we have our search parameter, which will also be request.body.searchParameter. And then we also have our message type, which will be request.body.messageType. Okay. So now, after we've populated our search variable, what we want to do is now save it to the database, where we say search, and with the save function, we are able to save it. The save function basically makes it a future, and so we'll be able to get a then method. And so in there, we'll get a result. And what do we want to do with this result? Nothing much. Maybe console.log the result. And then say res.status. We're going to be using 201, which means a new resource has been created. So we'll say .json, and in there we would have the message as search saved. And then our added search would be the search variable. We would, of course, catch errors. We'll say .catch. So we would catch any error. And what do we want to do when we catch these errors? We just say res.status500.json will have an error. Then we'll say internal error. Please try again later. Perfect. And with that, we've gotten our post request. And so let's quickly create our get request, which should be easy. So we say route.get. Again, we go to the same route and we say request, response, next. So in there, we would get our question. So we say const, and then we destructure what we get from the request.query. So we take it as a query, and then we would assign a search name. And then we would equal this to name.lowercase. So just in case everything is in caps, we just lower everything the person searches for. And then we would also split it into an array when they add a comma. And then what we want to do now is search for the query that the person searched for. So this is how it's going to be. The root is going to be search. Then we're going to have it as name, which is equal to whatever the person searched for. So if the person searches for who is Ariana Grande, we are going to search for this particular one here. And this is the code that we've written right here. And inside the search.find, what are we going to use to search? We'll search our search parameter, and then using this regex, we are going to have it as a new regex expression where we get our search name and then we get the I. And when we get it, we're going to get back our results, which in here, we also have a catch error here. And for now, we just want to print the error as console.log, whatever error we get. But when we are right, When we are in the clear, we get a result. But first of all, we need to check if the results.length is equal to 0, which means that we didn't get any results. So there was no error, but we also didn't get any results. All we want to see is res.status and with the 404, which means not found. We have JSON and the message saying no dice, we did not find anything. When you are building yours, you should put something professional there, of course. And then else, which means we did get a message. Then we get a res.status at 200, where we say JSON. And then we want to see the number of result found, so we say result found, which would be the result length. And also we will say matching results will also be equal to the result. And that's how easy it is to create a search functionality. And it's quite powerful actually, because I didn't get any problems when trying to fetch the data in any way. I was able to get all the data that I stored from the database. Again, if you are finding problems with the JavaScript syntax or the Flutter syntax, I'm here to help. Let me know in the comment section and I will help you out. But guys, with this we've been able to create a post request and a get request as well. We also need to make sure that we export our router, as we say, module.exports router. So our backend is almost done. There are certain things that we need to do. We need to connect it to our MongoDB database, which we will do in a second. But in the index.js, there are one or two things I want to do before we connect our database. Import search routes. That is the routes we just created. Because we want our server to know that, hey, we have a new route. We don't just want this. We want a more professional way of doing things. And so this is the only route running now. Okay? And so we want our search route to also run as well. And so in here, we'll require that route, which would be /route, and then we'll get the search. There we go. We'll also need our body parser because we'll be passing the data in a JSON format. And we do not want any errors. And so we'll also be requiring the body parser we installed earlier. And then let's go to package.json to confirm that we have a body parser and we don't have that dependency here. And so we'll quickly add the body parser now. And so in here, just clear everything. And we will say npm install body parser. So as our body.parser is installing, let's set up our route. So we almost have everything done. So in here, we'll now have a new route saying app.use, and then we'll say /, and then we'll then use our search routes. And this will be able to make sure that our route is set up, and we'll be able to connect our database more efficiently. We also need to make sure that the body parser, which acts as a middleware, is installed. And so we also need to check if it's done, and yep, it's done. And so let's just import it. I think we already even have it here. And so we'll say app.use, and then bodyparser.json. It acts as a middleware. And again, if you don't understand anything that I say, please hit me up in the comment section. I'll be very glad to explain everything to you. Superb. And we are not done. We still need to set something here. We have to set up what we call CORS. We also need to deal with CORS, which stands for Cross-Origin Resource Sharing. So in the description below, I've explained what CORS does. But let's set it set up so we handle any CORS problem that we have. And so I would quickly do that. And so we would have app.use, where we would get a request, we'll get a request, a response, and the next. Yes, and this is me setting up CORS. And so I will just speed through that and then set up the CORS. The code is also in the description below and also in the GitHub repository. So you could just copy and then just paste it right here. But I'm just setting up CORS here. And so let me just set up and then let's go. Okay, so there you go. I didn't want to bore you with all these details, but basically, this helps us solve cross-origin resource sharing problems. If you want more information, check the link in the description below. And again, this code is made available also in the description below. You can just copy and paste, and it just makes sure that you don't run into any cross-origin sharing problems. Okay, that is good. So I think we are almost done setting up our servers. We have our nice looking post and get request where we are able to post information to our database. And a user is able to also get information by passing in a query. The last thing left for us to do is to be able to connect our MongoDB right here. Okay, so let's quickly do that. Okay, so we're signing into MongoDB. I would log in with Google, and then in here, you come here, and then you just say New Project. We'll navigate to the new project, and then we'll just call it Creed GPT. You press next, and everything is looking awesome. We just say, create project. Okay, so we then create a deployment, and we'll choose the free version here. We will leave everything as it is, and then we'll say create deployment. And in there, you could specify your username right here, and then you could also make sure that you copy and save your password. I would be disabling the database later. So if you use mine, it wouldn't work, okay? So make sure you remember your username and your password as well. And make sure you safely copy your password. You would need it later. So now you need to choose a connection method. So you create a database user, then you need to choose a connection method. After pressing the connection method, you would just need to go and select drivers. So you would choose this driver here, and so you would be giving a link. This is mine. I've blurred it because, as I said, it wouldn't even work because I'll be deleting the database. But in here you get a link, and that's where you just have to copy, and then you just press review, set up steps, and then you say done. Okay, so the link you got, you come back to your project, and then just paste it right here. Again, I've blurred certain details because I don't want you to see the username and password. So I've blurred that part, but you should use your own. And then, with this, we've been able to set up our server, connected our database, and everything is ready to run. Let's check if it works. And so, let's go back to our database, and in here we'll have database right here. And then we'll say browse collections. And so this is where our database would be saved to. Right now, we have nothing, we just have these sample collections, which we don't need. And so we'll be deleting each and every one of them. So I've dropped all of them. So this is where you would see any collection we save. Awesome. So most of you will be familiar with Postman, where you are able to test your APIs. And if you use Postman, you should continue to use it. But for me, I use Insomnia. And this is how it looks like. So this is how we are able to test our API. And so first of all, go with a post request. And in there we specify our local host where we say 3000. And then we'll say search. And then the body would be of JSON format. And then we'll have the body of the post request. So there are certain things that we need. So as you saw from the search model earlier, the ID is auto-generated, but we need to input our response, our search parameter, our message type, and our date as well. And the date is auto-generated because the default is set to date.now, and that's what we want. Okay, so we need to input our response, search parameter, and message type. And so we would have it as response, which is a string. And then we'll say, Ariana is the most talented woman in the world. So that will be our response. And then we also need our search parameter. And remember that this time it is a list of string. And so these are likely things that the user would likely search for. So who is Ariana? And maybe just Ariana Grande. And then let's add another one saying most talented woman in the world. So with our ChatGPT, this is our search parameter. And of course, as we've been coding, you have realized something. Your GPT is more powerful based on your database. And so in the introduction I gave you, you saw how my database was able to generate a whole lot answers to you. So basically, if you want your ChatGPT to be smarter, your database should just be powerful. Okay? And so then the message type, which is a string, would also be of the type string like so. There we go. So this is our post request, ready for action. So let's just check if our server is running. And so let me go to the terminal, and we need to start our server. So because in our package.json, we've added this script. Now all we have to do is say npm start. And this will be able to start the server for us and detect any changes. And you wouldn't have to manually be typing nodeindex.js all the time. Okay? And so the server is starting. And as you can see, there we go. Our server is started now. Fingers crossed. Let's check now. Let's send, and there we go. We get server cooked and baked. And that's because inside here, we need to go back and make sure that inside our index.js, we add this search right here. So this should be added here so that it knows that it has to go to this route to do the post request. Let's save that. And then let's come back again. And this time, hopefully it would work and we get an internal error. Please try again. I don't know where the error is coming from. Let's see. Let's go to our terminal and our server is running. So let's check again. Okay. And so let's see, I think the error is coming from, okay, right here. In here where we are requiring Mongoose, it should be just Mongoose. Not MongoDB, but Mongoose. And as I said, Nodemon determines any changes that we make, and it restarts as well. So let's see if that solves it. So let's come back and see. We still get the internal error problem. Okay, so it turns out that the database was not fully created yet, and I also had a poor internet connection, and that was why we were getting the internal service errors now. I think after that, there we go. We get our message saying, search saved. We get our response. I think we made a mistake. In here, we have this search schema. It is not supposed to be like that. Let's go back and fix that. I think we need to go to our schema. Oh, and this is a mistake. Here should be search parameter. There we go. So I think this error should go away. So I was able to solve my internet connection. I hopefully it doesn't mess up again. But as you can see, we get the message search saved. You get the added search, we get an ID, a response, and a search parameter, and the message type. Everything here is saved. And then let's test again by having a GET request, going through the same route. But this time let's search for who is Ariana. So in our GET request, as you saw earlier, we would have here as name, and then we will have here as who is Ariana. And then we'll press send, and there you go. We were able to search and get it. We got our state of 200 request has succeeded. We're able to get our result. So there you go, guys. And then to confirm, let's go back to our database. Let's refresh MongoDB, and let's see if all our data is here as well. Okay, so as you can see, we get this data right here. And this is looking very, very awesome. Now we've been able to set up our server and backend. We've been able to build the front end. We've been able to build the backend. Now, let's just write the code where our front end interact with our backend, and then we'll be able to get our GPT running. Okay, let me just close everything now. All right, so we've been able to build our front end. We've been able to build our backend. Now let's make them talk to each other. Right now they are not talking to each other, so let's make them talk. So we'll come to our repository, and then we'll say chat repository.dart. This is where all our function or logic is going to be. We are going to write all the code here where our front end is going to be talking to our backend. And we would have this amazing ChatGPT. And so in there, we are going to require Firebase auth. We're also going to require Firebase Firestore. We will say Firebase Firestore. And then we'll call that Firestore. We also need to import the Firebase auth. And there we go. Now let's generate the constructor for this. And again, we are using Riverpod as our state management tool. And so we would create a provider later so that we'll be able to communicate with other providers and other widgets as well. But this is the most difficult part in our code, receiving the data from the backend and showing it to our front end. On your screen now is behind the scenes of me coding this function and making them work, because we had two databases talking to each other. We had me fetching data from MongoDB, storing it in Firestore database, then displaying it from Firestore database to our front-end screen. And it wasn't easy because we even had to pass in complex data, and Firestore wasn't having it. And so this code is the most sophisticated code that is in this project. After this, all of them are simply not that hard. And so let's go ahead and create the function getSearchResults. And so what we'll firstly do is come here and create a model where we call that model search. So we're basically going to have the same model that we had created earlier, mostly like this. And so that's what we're going to have here as well. So that we'll be able to retrieve it on our front end and pass the data accordingly. Of course, every model that I create should have an ID, just like we have the ID there. And then we will need our response, which is a string. And then we'll also need our message type, so that we could display whether audio, video, and then you will need a time, call it created at. For now, we'll just be using a string. You could use datetime, but again, since on our front end we're not really showing any dates there, and we don't really need a date, I'll just store it as a string. So in here, I will generate a constructor and also generate a data class. Okay, so we'll come back to our chat repository, and then we'll be using the future either. And then we'll return our search model that we created. Now this future either is coming right from the type def.dart we created earlier. Again, if you clone the repository I told you to clone, you will get access to this future either. We get this type def from Dart, and we get this future either from fp.dart. This helps us manage errors. And this is a very fantastic way of writing an efficient code, so you'll be able to handle errors more efficiently. And so we'll call our function getSearchResults. and then it will be an asynchronous process. And we would also need to require the model here. Now, get ready. We are going to write one of the most sophisticated code you will ever write. Getting data from the MongoDB, storing that data you get from MongoDB to Firestore database, and then displaying it as a stream to your front end. It sounds very easy when I say it that way though, so we'll wrap this in a try and catch block because this is something that could potentially fail, and in there, we will be able to return left. Left is coming from the future, either that we created earlier. If you are not familiar with this type of syntax and writing, you should check some of my other videos. I have extensively explained how to use fp-dart. Superb. And so now in the try block, this is where the magic happens. This is where we're going to be creating the function. So the first thing we need to do is, of course, fetch our data, talk to our API, so we say await. And then we'll say http.get, but I don't think we have HTTP in our project yet. And so using the Dart dependency, we would get HTTP. So we've successfully been able to install HTTP into our project. And now let's get it. So we need to import HTTP. So we say import package, and then we want HTTP as HTTP. So now with that, we'll be able to get access and say URI.parse, and our URI is going to be HTTP. Of course, if you are looking to deploy, you will need to have a hosting service so that you'll be able to host it live rather than using localhost, okay? And remember that our search.js was a query, and so we know that we will be getting the search, and we know we'll be getting the name. Now we need our question. The question that the user would ask, and we will get that from the function parameter right here. So we'll say asked question. Okay, looking great. And then we'll be able to pass our ask question right here. So we are getting this error. Silly me, this should be in this block. And so we need this try block right here. Sorry for that. And so let's get back on track. So now that we've been able to contact our backend, we'll get back what we know as a response. And so now we need to decode our response. And so we say final decoded results is equal to, and with JSON decode, we'll be able to decode that results. So we have JSON decode res.body. And I want to decode what? Let's go back to Insomnia and you realize that this is what we get. Okay, now what I want to decode is the matching result. I don't really care about results found. As you can see, ChatGPT doesn't show you how many results they get, so we don't really care about this. But what we care about is this. This is what I want to decode. This matching result right here. Let me copy that here, come back here, and then in there, make sure that I'm decoding the matching results, and then make sure that it knows that it is of the type list. Because as you zoom in, you see that the matching result is of type list. Wonderful. Now in here, we need to check if decoded results dot is empty. That means when we contact the database, we can get no results. So if this is empty, we just want to throw an exception so that it goes to the next catch block. We just want to throw an exception saying, I do not have any clue what happened. Try again later. Okay, so this is just to make sure that our code is not buggy. And every time that we did not get a result, we throw this exception so that we'd be able to display it to the user, giving the user a better experience. I also want to print the decoded results so that it would help me to know if I'm on the right track. So let's just print the decoded results. So now, remember that the type we are returning is search. So now that we've gotten the decoded results, which is now of type list dynamic, we need to make sure that it's in the format of a search, so that we could easily pass the data around. And so in here, we'll say final results, which is equal to the decoded results. And then let's map it to the search from JSON. And then we know that it is a list, but we want the first one. We always want the first value. And so if we searched who is Ariana and got more than one results, we just won the first one because the first one is always likely to be the most useful information that the user will want. And this also helps us build the regenerate function, where whenever the user press regenerate, this value here changes to 1. But this is out of the scope of what we are coding. I won't be doing the regenerate functionality, but let me know if you want the code. I could write the code for you, but we won't be doing the regenerate function in this tutorial. We'll just be going with this one question, one answer approach. And so after we've had the final results, we've been able to decode it to a search, but there's one problem. Remember that in the search.js, we are getting our ID as _ID, but in our search.dart, when you check this is just ID, so it wouldn't be able to fetch it. And so we need to make sure that here is _ID, and the from map is _ID. And there we go. And now that we've made this _ID, it'll be able to get the real ID. Now that problem is solved. Now we've been able to retrieve this final result, and then make it in the type of search. And now we could technically return, right, which is the final results. Now you may be wondering, I said it is the most sophisticated code that we are going to be writing in this video, but we have just written 42 lines of code. And that's because we are actually not done. What we've done is cool. But the next thing we're going to do is store this data we get from our backend to Firestore. Now what makes this complicated is that we need to create a model that would display the data to our front end. Let me explain what I mean. When you come here, you see that we see our question and answers. So we need to have a model that has a question. We need to have a model that has an answer. You need to have a model that has the message type that we display different messages. So the first approach we would now do is now create what we call the question. So this is a model that we are going to create. So again, it always has an ID. Every model that I create would always have an ID. And it will of course have a question. And this is where it gets complicated. For the answer, we don't want any answer. What we also want is the type. And initially I created a class for it. But a class is a complex data type. And so storing it in Firebase database is very hard to do. And so what we'd rather have is final. We know it's going to be a list of map string, dynamic. And so this way Firebase would understand it very well. And actually, our question would also be a list of questions, because as you can see, we have mutable questions here, and our answers are also a list. Wonderful. And so then also, we will have the time it was created as well. And I think that is it. So we would generate constructor for these, and also generate data class. Now with this, we have the model that we also want to store in our database as well. And so we'll come back to the chat repository, but let's try and fix the error here. Let's just add a parenthesis, and there we go. Error fixed. And let's just remove this. We don't really need it. And let's just add a parenthesis. Perfect. Error fixed. I think it's a little bug from data class. Whenever you have a complex type, they mess up with the extra parenthesis, but we fixed it. So, let's come back, and now that we have our question model, we know how to store our data in our database. So in here, let's continue with the logic we are implementing. After I'm done, I'll go over it again so that you better understand the logic that I used in order to build the GPT you saw in the introduction earlier. And so we would have a list of string, and we'll call them existing questions, which would be empty for now. We also have another list of map string dynamic, which would also be existing answers. And here we go. We will say await firestore.collection. We want to create a collection where we call it search, and then we'll have doc auth.currentuser.uid. And then we'll have another collection. I would call it user searches, and have the document to be auth.currentuser.uid. Again. All right? Then we have .get. Now don't worry, I would explain the code in a minute. So then we change the value to doc. This would be an asynchronous process. And in here we would check if the document exists. Then we want to get the questions. We would have question, which is equal to questions. And so for the ID, this is going to be the document ID. For the questions, it's going to be list_string.from. In there we have doc question. And then for the answer is going to be list mapstring dynamic.from doc answer. And the created at is also going to be doc created at. So now that we've populated our question and assigned it to a variable, what we do then is now assign the existing questions we created earlier, because right now it's empty. We now assign it to questions.question. And then we also now assign the existing answers to question. And this question is coming from the variable we created here. And because it has the type question, we'll be able to get access to the answer field that it gives us. And so don't worry, I would explain the code again. Let me just try and get the code out of the way, and I will explain how this code works. And so now we have updated question, because these are the existing questions that was in our database. If the documents exist, then these variables will contain the document the database has, because we populated it with it. And don't worry, I would explain it again. And then, in here, inside our updated questions, what we would have is the existing questions. And then, with the cascade operator, we will be able to add the asked question. I would be explaining this in a bit. And then, we also need to get an updated answer as well. And so, we would have here has list string dynamic, where we have updated answers, which would be equal to the existing answers. And also with the cascade operator, we need to add the answer generated as well. But how do we get our answer generated? Because it isn't as simple as a list of string, but it is a list map of string dynamic. And so what we would do is we would have a map string dynamic, call it answer to be added. And in there, we know it is a map of string dynamic. And so in there, we know that we are getting our value, which is going to be final results.response. And also, we are getting the type, which is final results.message type, and we're not getting access to our final result because it is right below here. So we need to bring it on top right here. Perfect. And so now we get access to our final result and we get the answer we want to add. And so therefore in here, we say answer to be added. So now with all that done, we say await. Firestore.collection. Again, don't worry, I would be explaining everything to you in a second. So we have the doc, which takes auth.current user.uid, and then we'll go to the collection where we have it as user searches.docauth.currentuser.uid. And in here we would have the .update. And what do we want to update? I want to update the answer field with the updated answers, and also want to update the question field with the updated questions. Cool. Now, this is the update phase. That is when the document exists, which means the user have already searched for something before. But if there is no document, then it means this is the first time the user is searching. And what do we want to do when it is their first time? We also want to have the answer to be added, so just copy and paste that here. And we will have our question variable again, but this time it will be a little different, newer to be precise. So we have our question variable again, and this time we have it as the final result.id. Remember, we'll be using the ID that we get from MongoDB right here. And then the question would be a new list with the asked question variable. Then the answer would also be answer to be added. This right here, everything the response gave us. And then the created at will also be final results.created at, and then add this trailing comma, and there we go. And with that, we will be able to call this same code. But this time we'll be setting question.toMap. Superb. So I know that was a little bit complicated, but let me try and explain it to you. We are trying to get the search result. That is, whenever the user clicks on this icon here, what we want to do is get the result of the question they asked for. And so what we did was we contacted our API, got the results from the API, has a response. We JSON decoded it, got the matching results, which I explained earlier, we get from here. Okay, we don't need a result found, but we get the matching results. And we know it is a list, and then this is just for debugging error purposes. We check if it's empty, and we throw an exception. This will send it to the next catch block and display the error appropriately. Then what we did was have a list of existing questions and a list of existing answers, which are both lists. The only difference between them is that they have different types. And before this should even be right here. And then before everything, we make sure that we decoded the results that we get. Because this is of the type list dynamic, we want it to be in a model that we could pass data around very easy. And so we created our own search where it has an ID, response, message type, and created at. Okay, so we created it like so. And then make sure that the list of type dynamic is now of type search. And there you go, it's now of type search. After doing that, we wanted to go into the database, because this is how we store our database. This is how we store whatever the user searches, we store it in our database. I earlier said that we are getting the data from MongoDB. We are storing the data to Firestore database, And then we are displaying the data we get from Firestore database to our front end. So that is what I did here. I went into collection.search.documents, another collection, and then I try getting it. And if the document existed, then I pre-populated the document so that I would be able to fill my existing questions and my existing answers. And so when I got the question, I was able to fill in my existing questions and existing answers. If it exists, that means the user has already searched for something before. So all I want to do is make sure that I have an updated questions and an updated answers. And so I added the existing questions and I added the asked question where we get it from the parameter here, and I added it. And with that, I was able to get my updated questions. But for the updated answers, it's a little bit complicated because we are receiving the type as mapstring dynamic. And so the value is the response we get, and the type is the type of message because the response is always string, of course. But the type could be an audio, and so we needed every answer to have a type property. That is why we have it in the mapstring dynamic format. And so we got that. And thanks to the help of finalResults.response and message type, we're able to assign the value and the type. And with that, we are then able to add it, and we get our updated answers. And so after all this, after the document exists, then we surely want to go into this directory and update it. But if it doesn't, we just want to set it as a new question model. I hope I have explained it well, and I hope you understood it as well. And don't worry if you don't understand, please don't hesitate to hit me up in the comment section, and I will explain it to you again. And so now we will create our chat controller. And I hope you are all familiar with the idea of clean architecture and why we are doing it like so. Again, if you do not understand it, you could go hit me up in the comment section and I will explain it. And so we will have our chat controller, where we would have final chat repository. And then we would require that chat repository. We would create a constructor for that. And we need to come back to the chat repository and have a provider that we will be able to talk to other providers. And so I'll quickly create a provider and call it chat repository provider. We get this from Flutter Riverpod as our state management tool. I would highly recommend you to use Riverpod for your projects. And in here we will return the chat repository. And in there this would be Firebase auth.instance. And this would be Firebase Firestore.instance. So with this provider, we'll be able to communicate with other providers. Now the first function we had was this search function right here. We will copy that and then paste it right here. And so we would have a await chat repository.get search result. So with the help of the FP Dart that we did earlier, we'll be able to get an access to a fold method, and this fold method will allow us to handle success cases and failure cases as well. And so if it fails, I want to print l.message. Usually you could add maybe a snack bar, or you could add a dialog box to display the error message that you had. So with a success case, I just want to return R like so. And there we go. With this, we'll be able to call the function, and if the function fails, we'll just print this in our debug console. And if it succeeds, we'll just return the search that we wanted right here. And this is looking very superb. And so now let's hook up the search to this icon right here, and make sure that everything here is now dynamic. So let's see if our code works. And so we'll go back into our main chat. Inside our main chat where we have the icon.send, we'll have get search results right here. Now let's create that function. So in here, we'll create the get search results, and in order to get access to all the functions in the chat controller, we're not going to use provider like we did here. Here we are going to be creating a state notifier provider, and to do that, we need to make sure that this extends a state notifier, and then it is of the type bool. So that in here will say super false. Initially, this bool is set to false, and with this, we're able to get access to the state notifier provider, and then we could call the chat controller. So that with this, we'll be able to get access to every function that is in our chat controller class. Nice. And in here, we're going to return the chat controller, which takes in the chat repository. So we'll get the repository by talking to the provider we created in the chat repository. So in here, we ref.watch chat repository provider. And with that, we will be able to get access to the chat repository class as well. Very, very simple. And this state notifier also helps us to get state in which our function is in. And so, since we are returning bool here, we can set the state here to true. And then, when the function is done, we can also set the state here to false, so that we'll be able to display loading spinners whenever the function is about to begin, and then stop displaying them whenever our function is done. And so by writing this code, we'll be able to change this icon into some kind of loading spinner. When we get our result, it will then change back to our send icon. So this is something that we are going to do. And so now, with this chat controller provider, we'll be able to get access to all the functions in the class. So we'll come back to main chat, and in here, with ref.watch, we will contact chat controller provider. And since this is a state notifier provider, we won't be able to get access to any method, because this is a state notifier provider. To get access to the method, we need to add notifier. And with that, we'll be able to get access to the get search result. And what is our asked question here? Our asked question here is the question controller.text. And then let's just trim it for safety. And there we go. And with this, as simple as that, we've been able to bind our function. Now let's test everything. If our code runs successfully, we'll be able to get this decoded results in our terminal. And then this means that our function is working, and then we'll be able to also store this data in our database. Okay, so fingers crossed, the moment we've all been waiting for. Let's try it out. Before we do though, I also want to change the icon to a loading indicator whenever we are fetching the data. And so in here we would have final is loading. And we'll set it to ref.watchChatControllerProvider so that it gives us access to the Boolean property. And we're not getting access to this Boolean property. This should be Boolean, so inside the chat controller, we need to specify the class and the Boolean value right here. So in here it will be chat controller, then bool. And so when we come back here, when you hover around it, you get a Boolean property of the provider. And therefore, we will be able to manipulate whether we have a send icon or a loading indicator. So if it is loading, which means that our state is now true, and it means that this function is now running. And so if it is loading, then I want to display a circular progress indicator. Otherwise, I just want to display my send button. Okay, this is looking great. Let me come back to our debug console. So I will be able to see whether we had our question and answers. So let's test the code now, please. And so in here, I'm asking, who is Ariana? And fingers crossed, let's see. There we go, we get this loading spinner, which means that it stops, which is a very nice cool effect, and which means that our function has run and is completed. So let's come back to our terminal. And then we get this XML HTTP request error. And this is because our server is not live. Okay, and so we need to come back to the terminal, navigate to the server, and then make sure we run npm start so that we'll be able to start our server. And so if you see this error is because your server is not live. That is why we were able to get this error. Now let's wait for our server to start, and there we go. Our server is now live. Now this error coming here indicates I have a very poor internet connection now. So let me just make sure that the Wi-Fi is connected and make sure everything is working properly now. Alright, so I've connected my Wi-Fi. I've made sure that our server is running. Now let's go ahead and then search who is Ariana. And there we go, it runs. And there we go, guys. We are able to get our decoded results, but we do get expected value of type string, but got one of type JSON map. We will fix that, but we got our results, which means we have minimal errors. And I do not have any Wi-Fi problems anymore. But that does not mean our whole function ran, because remember that we also stored our data to our database. So let's go to our Firestore database to check if we are able to store the necessary data we coded in here. And so here's our database, which has reloaded. But as we can see, we didn't get the search collection, and that part of the code didn't ran. I think I am justified now, but saying this code was complicated, so I think it did not run because of the error we got here. So let's try and see if we could find the error. So the error usually comes from where we have the list of string map dynamic. But in here it says we expect the value of type string, but got one of type JSON map. Okay, let's go back to the search. And I think the error is coming from the JSON function generated to us by the data class. When you are fetching data from APIs, because you have your own predefined fields, you should always create your JSON function so that you do not run into the same error we have now. And so we have here search from JSON. And in here, instead of we getting just a string of source, it would be map string dynamic. And then in there, we would assign the ID as source_ID. Always remember to bring the underscore because the ID we are getting is from MongoDB. And then we also have to get a response where we have the source map response. Then we also have the message type, which is also going to be source message type. And then you're going to have the created at, which is going to be source. And if you check, you would realize that in here, it is date not created at. That is where our error came from. So let's just comment this, and you need to place a semicolon here, and there we go. I think with this, we have a new from JSON function. So let's refresh everything, and then let's search again, and hopefully no errors. So in here, we have who is Ariana. And we press send, it searches for it, and then we are done. We come back, let's go to our terminal, and there we go. We still get the value of type string, but this time of type null. Let's go to our database to see if it did save. So let's refresh this, and let's see if we got it right this time. And it did not save, we still have an error. And this is what I was talking about earlier. How complicated this is, because you are fetching data from MongoDB and sending it to Firestore database. You are not displaying it directly. You are then sending it to Firestore database, and then you display it. It becomes a little difficult, but don't worry, we'll figure it out. Okay, so I think I found the error. Let's go back to search. The model. There we go. Inside the from JSON function, instead of placing date here, I did it data, and that was why we're getting this error. It is supposed to be date, and I hope this time it works. So let's restart everything, and then let's go and type, who's Ariana, and let's see if it works this time. Okay, so let's try our hands on it. So we'll check who is Ariana, and there we go. It loads, and it's done. Let's check. And there we go. We get no error again. We do fetch our data, and now fingers crossed. When we reload our database, we should see that our data is stored in our Firestore database. And there you go, guys. We get users, and then we get user searches. And then we come here, and there we go. We also have it displayed here. I think it worked. It worked perfectly, but it was a little bit of mistake here. And that is when we come back to our chat repository in here. Okay, so when we are setting the data, I made it users, and we wanted to create a new collection called search. Okay, and so even though it's worked, and we are able to see it, it is not how I want it, okay? I want it to have its own collection. And so all I have to do is change this here to search instead of the users. And if I save it and we try to add who's Ariana again, we would get an error. And so in order not to get an error, we would need to delete this user searches. We need to delete this, so we would then do it again. And I mistakenly deleted my database as well. Don't worry, let me quickly fix this so that I get my user data back. But apart from that, we saw that it's worked. But since I mistakenly deleted my database, I'm going to fill the data again, and when I'm done, I'll see you. We know that now it's worked. So I got my user's information back. And so now let's go ahead and let's search again. So we will check who is Ariana, and then you see it loads. It is taking a while. I hope I don't have any Wi-Fi problem again. And we are done. We see this data here. And so now let's come back here and let's refresh. I think that this time everything would be working now. And the collection still goes to user collection, which means that I did not fix my error. As you can see, it works. But it looks like I still did not fix the error. So let's go to the chat repository. In there we have the search, okay? And this should be search as well. Okay, it's looking great. I think we have it as search, okay? I think now everything is now great. So I would try and delete it again. This time I'll be much more careful. Let's delete the collection. User searches. Okay. All right. So now let's test the code again. We have who is Ariana, and then it loads, which means that our function runs. And there we go. Let's reload and see if this time we get it. And there we go. This time we get it right. We come to the search and then we get our unique data ID. It loads and then we also get it. And this is how it works. Now let's see how the update function works. You've seen the set functionality work. Now let's hope and pray that this update functionality work. And so what we have to do is ask another question like Taylor Swift Tour. So let's ask another question like Taylor Swift Tour. And then it loads and it works here. We get this. Everything is correct now. And there you go. We see that our answer has increased. We get the question. We get our answer has Taylor Swift Eras Tour, which means it is working. Now that we have been able to fetch our data from MongoDB, store them to Firestore database, it's time for us to display it on the screen. Whenever we search it, so it is live. The moment we search for something, it pops up on the screen, and then we have our GPT functionality. So I think we are almost coming to the end of the video. You should stick around as I will show you how to monetize it. And so let's create the function where we are able to display the information in our database on the GPT screen. So to do so, it's actually quite easy. Yes, I did tell you that the hardest part was getting the search results. And by now, all we have to do now is create a stream. And of course, we would return question because that's the type we are storing in the Firestore database. Let's call it getAllQuestionsAndAnswers and would require ref. You will see that later in the code. And then in there, we are going to return firestore.collection. We're going to our search collection. We know the document to be auth.currentuser.uid. Then we go to the user searches and then doc auth.currentuser.uid.snapshot. And then we're going to map everything. So we're going to the Firestore database, and then we're going to exactly here. And then we're getting live updates, live stream updates. So now all that we have to do is to convert whatever we get, because when hover around this, you see that we get the type document snapshot. We just need to convert it to a question. So that's what we're going to do. But not without doing a few checks so that we escape errors on our site. So we check if event.exists or if event.data is equal to null. That means that is document snapshot, it doesn't exist, there is no data in it. Then what we want to return is an empty question. This will rarely happen though. And so in here it would be null, the answer would be empty list, and the created at would just be a string. And it actually makes sense. If there is no data, then it means that this question, there is nothing in this question. And this rarely happens because of the check we've made here. Because of the if document.exists check we've made here, this really happens. But that is what makes you a good programmer, to make sure that every time your code is very foolproof. But this would really happen. Anyway, apart from that, we would know that it exists. And so we would get our data. So we say event.data, and then we would get our list of string questions. Now, I know that this isn't usually some of the routes you guys take. The reason for this being so complicated is that we are passing a complex data type, and that is the answer field. The answer field is a complex data type, map string dynamic. And since you usually pass in normal primitive data, and this is a non-primitive data, that is why the code is a little bit complicated. And so in here, we would get the question. Otherwise, we just get a null value. And then we get a list of map string dynamic, which would be our answer, which would be of the type list string dynamic. So copy this, dot from where we have our data answer, or else we just have an empty string right here. Awesome. And now that that is done, all we have to do now is return question with the ID being data ID. Otherwise it's empty, then the question being question, and the answer being answer here, and the created at being data, and then we have created at. So this way we are able to display a stream of questions. And so we'll just come to our chat controller as well. We'll just copy this and then come to our chat controller. And then we'll just return chat repository.getAllQuestionsAndAnswers. I would need to create a stream provider for this. And if you have not been using Riverpod, you would go with a stream builder. But Flutter Riverpod got us covered. And in there, we will be able to create a stream provider. And they will call it GetAllQuestionsAndAnswers Provider. So in there, what we'll do is we'll have final chat controller. We should talk to the chat controller provider because it has access to the chat repository class. And in there, again, because this is of type state notifier, when I get press dot, I wouldn't be able to get access to it. And so I need to call the dot notifier in order to get access to all the functions there. We have dot notifier and we have dot. And we will get all questions and answers and looking superb. And so now all we have to do now is go into our showcase where we are displaying this. In here, we would rather return ref.watch, getAllQuestionsAndAnswers.when. When there is data, what do you want to do? You want to return this list view builder right here. So let's return the list view builder. Again, I would recommend you use Flutter Riverpod. It is a very great tool. It is very simple to use, and I would highly recommend it. And in here, we would have error, but not only error, but trace. And we would just want to return center, where we will have the child to be text, and then error.toString. And for the loading, we just want to return a circular progress indicator. There we go. Looking great. Now, instead of having these static values in here, first of all, our item count will now be of data dot. And in here, we are getting the return type to be object. We need the return type to be of type questions. And so all we have to do is go into our chat controller. There we go. And then make sure that in the get question, we are returning a stream of question. There we go. And so when we save this and we come back to our showcase, we will be able to display data.question.length. And for this, we want to keep this. And then this text would be data.question. But here is the problem. Data.question is a list of string, and we can't assign it here, so we say I. And then we have to remove the const here, and then say const and const everywhere else. And then for the answer as well, we would have data.answer for that particular I, but you see it's of type mapString dynamic. And what do we want? Let's go back to our database. We want the value, this value here, because that is the answer we get. This type is what type of answer we get. So what we want is the value. And so in here, we say we want the value, and in here all we have to do now is remove the const and const everywhere else. Superb. Now with this, we should get every data that we have here should now be shown on the screen. So let's refresh everything, and hopefully we'll be able to get it without any errors. So our project has refreshed. Let's check if everything works. And okay guys, there you go. It's working perfectly. Let's try again and see who is Ariana, and then let's call it. You see this loads. The moment it loads, we have who is Ariana. We get Ariana Grande is the most talented singer in the world. Now make some changes. First of all, I think we want that animation style. You see in ChatGPT, as you see on the screen now, and whenever you search for something, it has a typewriter effect. And we do have it. So the problem with it is that the speed is fast, and that's why we don't see it. So let's send the speed to seconds of 3 seconds. And there you go. You see it exactly like that. So let's say Taylor Swift Tour. And then you're going to see Taylor Swift Eras Tour. It's looking very great. And there are so many things that we could do. But we are almost done with this section. But first of all, every time that I press this, that I want the question to clear, and that is very easy to do. All I have to do is, I need to go into the main chat. And then, whenever get search result runs, I also want my question controller.text to be set to null, and that's as simple as that. And so, if we come back again and say Ariana Grande, and then hit send, there we go. Ariana Grande is the most talented singer in the world. And also get this typewriter effect. And what we would also want is whenever I press this, it should scroll down to the lastest answer. And that is also very easy to do. Inside our listview.builder in the showcase, we would set a controller which would call scroll controller. And so in here, we just say final scroll controller controller and set it to scroll controller. And we called it scroll controller. There we go. And then we need to write a very simple function that is scroll to current question or current answer, something like that. Scroll to current answer. I'm going to write a very simple code that would make sure that whenever we have a new question, it sends us to that new question. So in here, we will check if the scroll controller dot has clients, and if it has clients, then we want the scroll controller dot animate too. So the duration will be const duration, and then we'll say a second of maybe 1 second. And then the curve would be curves. And there are a lot to choose from. You could choose anything you want. You can hover around it and get more information about it. And then the offset here would be scroll controller dot position dot max scroll extent. We want this to be triggered whenever the function runs. So let's go to where we have and here's the problem. The icon button, this right here, is in the main chat right here, and this listview.builder is right here. And so what we can do is that we need to send this function there. So what we could do is send the scroll controller over there. All we have to do is just send this scroll controller, so we could write the function there. And so in there, we just say final scroll controller. We generate constructor for that, and we'll just say super.key. And so now what we'll do is take this function and then send it right over here. And also make sure that this scroll controller is also sent over here. There we go. And now all you have to do is pass this scroll controller here. And then this function here as well there. And this is looking very great. And inside the showcase, it would rather be widget.scrollController. This is looking great. And so when we come back here and say, how are you doing? The function runs and we get, I am doing great. Very good. This is looking very, very great. Now let's talk about monetization, of course. ChatGPT came out and it had a free version for a while until they released GPT-4. And so we are going to write a very simple code that would actually shock you that to have a premium version of your own ChatGPT, you just need a very few lines of code. So let's write a few codes to have a premium version of the ChatGPT. So we'll come to the chat repository, and in there we'll create our monetization logic. In there we'll have a future either. Again, future either is coming from fp-dart and typedef, where we would have user model. And if you've cloned the project I told you on GitHub, this auth right here, you would have access to this user model as well. In there, what we code is premium limit, where we'd accept a user model, because at the end of the day, we need to return a user model, where we have async, and of course we'd have a try and catch block. Where we'd return left, yes, left is coming from fp-dart, and we'll have it as e-dot to string. Again, if you don't understand any of the syntax I'm writing, please hit me up in the comment section and I'll help you. So what do we want to do? Basically, we want to go to the Firestore, collection, go to the users collection, go to documents, then auth.currentUser.uid, and in there we want to update something. Now, what do we want to update? We want to update the limit. If you come to the user model, this user model has a property, final double limits. Now this limit shows you how many searches the user has done per day. And so what we want to do is update the limits. Every time the user searches for something, it increases this limit by 1. So all we have to do is go for the limit field, and then we'll call user.limit, and then increase it by 1. As simple as that. All we have to do now is return, right, which wants a user. And there we go, guys, as easy as this. Now, anytime a user searches on our GPT, we would update the limit by 1, and after we updated the limit by 1, you can then set a limit to the user searches. And then we'll see that in the code very soon. Let's take this and now go to the chat controller. There we go. And we'll need to import user model. And in there, we'll return chat repository.premium limit. And now all we have to do is now come back to our main chat, and in there, we'll create a function, call it premium limit. And in there, we'll just call ref.read chatControllerProvider.notifier. Then we'll call the premium limits. And we'll get access to the user from the parameter. And all we have to do now is call the limit whenever the user pressed the send button. So in here, we would call the limit, and then we'll pass in the user, which is not null. And that is it, guys. Whenever the user searches for something, we increase the limit by 1. And now we're not done. After every time the limit increases, what we want to now is say, if user.limit is greater than 10, so you set a limit. A user cannot search more than 10 searches per day. And so if the limit is greater than 10, then what you want to do is show a snack bar, which would be context. And what do you want to show? You have reached the daily limits. Why don't you come back tomorrow? When you are deploying yours, you should of course make it something more professional. So just move this here. And so what this does is, it is always checking the user limit. And if the user's limit is greater than 10, then we want to show a snack bar, which says you have reached your daily limits. Why don't you come back tomorrow? But the other function will continue to run. The premium limit will run, and then our question controller will then be set back to empty, which is now very great. And so you could manipulate the data. And so what we'll do is let's come back into our Creed GPT, into our Firestore database. And in there, when we have the searches, actually let's go to the user. And in there you want to increase this to 10. And let's see if indeed our function really works. So let's come back here and then let's search for Ariana Grande, of course. And then in there we hit it. We see it loads. And there you go. And we also see our scrolling functionality as well. And now that the limit is greater than 10, now let's check if, and we send another message if we'll get the snack bar or not. So let's search for the Taylor Swift tour this time. And let's see if we would get the pop-up. And there you go. You have reached your daily limits. Why don't you come back tomorrow? As we can see right here, I hope you saw that. And this is looking very great. And because of that, you see we are not able to scroll down anymore, because then the Taylor Swift trigger our search function. because we've made the check to make sure that it doesn't run when we pass 10. Very impressive. And so the one thing that I want to add to this logic is to be able to update the limits. Now, we want to update the limits back to 0 after a certain period of time. Okay. And so in here, we just create a function that will call update limits. We would need the user model, and of course, we'll have a try and catch block. And let me just print e.toString. But in here, this is where the function comes in. All you have to do is check if the user.limits, and here should be if the user. So if the user.limit is greater than 10, then all I want to do now is set a timer that would run after 24 hours. And after that, all we want to do now is await Firestore. This will be async. .collection, and you guessed it. We are going to the user's collection into the document, and then you're going to be updating the limits again. This time you're going to be setting the limits to 0. And with that, you have another function that easily updates after 24 hours. So it only updates if the user limit is greater than 10. And after that, after 24 hours, the user could come back and then his limit would be set back to 0. And then they could now search for whatever they want. Okay, so that is very awesome. Now, I think we are almost done with this. We have a lot of working functionality in our GPT now. Now, let's wrap everything together, and then let's have a very nice looking GPT. So for now, we've all seen that we are able to just generate text. So what if you want to generate images and audio and video, as you saw in the introduction? And so all we have to do is come back to the main chat inside the showcase, where we are displaying our typewriter. We want to first check if our data answer type is equal to string. If it is, then I surely want to display a typewriter, but if it's not, then I want to check again, but I want to check if it's an image. And if it is, I want to display an image.network where we would have data answer value. Awesome. And there, I want to check again. But this time, if it's audio, then I want to play something. I want to play an audio that we would create in a second. Otherwise, I just want to play a video which we would also create in a second. Now, since this video has already been long enough, I'm going to copy the audio widgets and the video widgets from GitHub. Again, all of the code would be made available on GitHub, so you could just come to the lib folder, and then you would come to widgets, and then you would copy the code as well. So every code is available. So I would create a new widgets and call them audioplayer.dart. I also create another one called videoplayer.dart. In the audio players, I would paste what I copied from my GitHub, and then all I have to do now is use the Dart dependency and install audio players. And whilst that is installing, I'll also copy what I got from my GitHub and also paste the video as well. I would actually be using the Opinio video player, so let me install that. This one right here. And now let me just import the audio player. And everything is working great. And so let me come back to the showcase. And whenever there is audio, I want to call in my audio players. And for the video, I think it's done now. And I think it's also done now. This is looking perfect. So inside my showcase, I will need to import this audio players right here. Let me const this as well. There you go. And with that, we are almost ready. And I think we called it test video. And looking wonderful. All what we have to do is make sure is to have dynamic values. So in the audio players in here, we just have this example right here. All we have to do is make sure that we get it from the constructor. We will say widgets.audio URL, which would create here, which would be a string. We have final string audio URL, and then we will generate constructor for that, and we'll do the same for the video as well. So all you have to do now is now pass the audio URL, which would be the value we get. And also the same for the test video, and we passing the video URL, which would be this right here. Okay, looking good. And with this, we'll be able to display images. We'll do some videos based on the value we get back. And so let's test this. I think as we are coming to the end of the video, let's test everything, and then let's see how it works. So we've already seen the text working. So let's start with the images. So we will say images of Taylor Swift, and then we send. We get the images, all functionalities working, and there you go, we get the image of Taylor Swift. And now let's also check the video functionality as well. And let's see, show me a bunny video. Let's press send. And there you go, guys. We also get the bunny video as well, where you see it playing. We see the video as well, and this is looking very awesome. So I think the last one to search for would be the audio. And so in here we'll say, play me a cool song, and press send. And there you go. So now we are going to hit the button to play as the new song. And there we go. It's loading, and we see that the song is playing as well. And this is looking very great. So we've made our own ChatGPT that does not only generates texts, but it gives us images, it gives us audio, and also give us video. So that is very impressive. So I did tell you that I was going to show you how you can start from $0 to whatever dollars you want to stop at. And so here you go, guys. So as you saw in the code, the more information your database has, the more powerful your ChatGPT is. So I recommend you to have some kind of website that you connect to the API and constantly update your database, especially on the search parameter. With that said, you could create an update route as well to do the trick. Now you cannot compete with ChatGPT by focusing on all niches. You need to specialize yours. So whether your ChatGPT is about fashion, arts, funny stories, cars, travel, YouTube, you name it, you just need to specialize it, and it will become a one-stop shop for anything relating to the above niches I said earlier. And hey, I am here to help. The most commented API in the comment section is what I will fully build 100% for all of you to use. It actually gives me an idea. We could set up multiple APIs so that people can use to creating their own ChatGPT. So go to the About section of my channel and grab my email. Hit me up if you want to be part of the team that embarks on this journey. Let me also know if you want other parts that I omitted, like the regenerate function, previous screen. And let me know if you want us to build one, where we train an AI model particularly to answer questions based on a certain niche. It's been lovely sharing this with y'all. That is for now. Please like, share, and don't forget to smash that subscribe button. Adios.